for joining us today for Armchair Historians. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cannon. Armchair Historians is a Belgian Rabbit production. Stay up to date with us through Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Wherever you listen to your podcast, that is where you'll find us. You can also find us at armchairhistorians.com. Armchair Historians is an independent, commercial-free podcast. If you would like to support the show, you can buy us a cup of coffee through Ko-fi, or you can become a subscribing member through Patreon. You can find links to both in the episode notes. Today I have the great privilege of talking to Tom Carradine, the genius behind Carradine's Cockney Sing-Along. Since its inception in 2014, Tom's old-fashioned music hall style sing-along has become a fixture on the UK's thriving vintage scene. He has played sell-out dates in the main auditorium at the historic Wilton's Music Hall, Hoxton Hall, and prior to COVID, he would wheel his affectionately named piano, Old Joanna, into Mr. Fogg's Tavern every Thursday night, where he would lead patrons of the previous residence of the British adventurer Phileas J. Fogg in a good old-fashioned sing-along, donning the day's meticulously selected vintage attire, for Tom only ever wears Victorian to World War II style vintage clothes. Since COVID and the subsequent social distancing regulations has made it impossible for the show to go on, as before, in public venues, Tom has taken his Thursday sing-along to Facebook. With the support of his lovely wife Faye and son Andrew, Tom has created an online international community where anyone with an internet connection can tune in and sing along to the nostalgic music of yesterday. In this two-part episode, Tom talks about his favorite history, of which I've discovered he's a virtual walking encyclopedia of. P.S. In honor of Tom and his favorite history, I showed up to our virtual interview donning my best Victorian attire. Come, drink some port wine with me down at the old Borland Bush. Hear the little German band, da-da-da-da-da. Just let me hold your hand, dear.
Hello.
Hey.
I love it. If I'd known, I would have full-on Victorianed up. I'm kind of 1940s at the moment.
Well, I was going to go with the 1920s because, I have this cute little bob. But then when you said Victorian music halls, I was like,
that's brilliant. You look amazing.
Well, thank you. Tom Carradine, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. It's lovely to chat.
I actually do tours in Georgetown. We're a National Historic Landmark District, so I do I have costumes for the period, so.
Okay.
How was Copenhagen?
In the words of Danny Kaye, it was wonderful.
Oh, good. Good, you felt comfortable and everything with the mask and?
The flight felt uncomfortable. I suppose it made me feel a little angry, actually, for the fact that because a lot of my work is theatre related and I've worked a lot in the theatre over the years, the feeling that you can be sitting on a plane next to each other with just a mask on and no temperature checks, yet you can't go and sit in the theatre for less time. It's, yeah. So, yeah. And also, like when they bring around there was no food, there was no kind of food service. They brought around a bag with some refreshments in. But of course, at that moment, everybody on the plane takes their masks off and shoves them. So I was like, I kept my mask on and was just like, no. On the way, thankfully, there was a seat either side, but on the way back, the plane was full. So
wow,
yeah,
interesting. My daughter's coming to visit from Pittsburgh, so
okay.
We're going to do a social distancing kind of. Thankfully, my niece has a cabin, which is on her property, so we can all get together outside. And of course, I'm sure it's my daughter, so I'll probably be a little bit less. I don't know. It'll be so nice to see her.
How long since you last saw her?
It's been a year.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a year.
Yeah, I haven't seen my parents kind of properly in a few months. Skype and FaceTime is wonderful.
Yeah, but, thank God for technology.
that kind of connection you have is
Well, I miss, I live in this great little town and I miss seeing my friends on the street and hugging them because I have that urge, and then I
similar with you
miss
with
that.
me. I'm quite a hugger, and that's much just my kind of natural response of greeting and saying goodbye. So yeah, it's very odd. And equally, it was interesting in Copenhagen. They have social distancing rules, a bit more laid back than in England, I suppose. And masks are only required on public transport, so not in shops. Whereas in England at the moment, in shops, and also we're limited to the number of people in a gathering. At the moment in Denmark, there's not. But yeah, so some people were happy to hug or shake hands, but equally some people were still quite wary, and we were doing the elbow thing. And I don't know whether you've been reading much or listening to much of the news from over here. The fact that one of the government advisors, Dominic Cummings, a few months ago broke lockdown and drove with COVID symptoms, drove across the country. And basically that's kind of given everyone a free for all, saying, well, if it's one rule for us and one rule for you, then so yeah, there's been lots of kind of bending of the rules, I suppose.
Oh yeah. Well, we just had Sturgis. I don't know if you know about that. It's a big motorcycle festival, and apparently that event is responsible for spread. For a huge. Anyways, I don't know. When we're doing terrible, we're doing. Don't get me started. But anyways, I want to say let's segue into something positive.
Okay, no worries. I'm good with that.
That in this world that we're in, I just interviewed Jules, and so he had posted your sing along, your self-isolation sing along, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting. And I didn't realize that you were actually, his singer, that you do a lot of his soundtrack for his
videos. Yeah.
His video.
I've fallen into that, really.
So then I'm like, oh, I'm going to check this out. And I started, and it's a new connection to that. It'll never replace that, what we were talking about, hugging people and that type of thing. But you and Faye and Andrew, and you just like, I'm getting choked up just thinking about it. I feel that connection. You do. In fact, whenever I can, I listen to you. And, I feel like
that's nice to hear.
I connect with your, audience, and we kind of go back and forth while you're playing. It just, thank you.
Yeah, that's one thing.
I cannot thank you enough for doing this. Like it's added something to our lives that I don't know if you realize the value of it.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. It's blown me away, the kind of the community that we've created through it. And you're right, just the conversations between the viewers watching and their interaction with us and with the material that I play. I suppose it just shows the power of the songs that I sing, and we can obviously talk about that today.
Definitely. I had the last 2 weeks, not this week, I just dropped a new episode, but last week I interviewed a guy named Frank Young, and he came up to me because we had music here outside, because we have this out. It was socially distancing and everything, I have to say that. But he came up to me and he said, I watched the video, the Weird Side video that I posted, kind of like as a, this is what's coming. And he said, it just brought me back to such a nostalgic place, of his childhood. And, there's just something inherent in the kind of music you sing it, and not just the kind of music you sing, the way you sing it, the way you reach out and connect to people, which is.
Thank you. That's lovely. That's lovely to hear. And it means as we've all kind of had to deal with lockdown and deal with the kind of the new normal in a way. It's been interesting that I was chatting to a friend before lockdown, saying I really enjoy the sing along gigs and the pub piano type stuff, but a lot of that is quite commercial and is quite it's playing to a touristy crowd, and it's a bit kind of twee. And so I'm along with all the old stuff which I adore, I might be playing more modern things and kind of playing to the crowd, I suppose. That's what pub piano sing-alongs have always been. I've always been playing the songs that people know. And so I said, I'd love to have more of an opportunity to share the stories and the history of some of these songs. And hey, blame me for lockdown, I suppose, or COVID. But it came true. And it's been lovely to be able to have that opportunity to talk about the songs. And actually, it's interesting, in the early days of the sing-along, the self-isolation sing-along, it was very much song. It was very much it's all about the music and trying to cram as much in. But actually, it's been nice because there is so much interaction on the comments, and people are kind of interested in standalone songs and things. That yeah, I have that opportunity to kind of talk about that, or do a week about music hall, or a week about something, and kind of people sending requests, and we can all kind of talk about those things, the songs that mean something to us, because yeah, that kind of what fascinates me is the different frame of reference that we all have. So we might know the same songs, but it's where we learned that song from, and what kind of, especially it was interesting that you mentioned in your message about kind of pop culture references and where those kind of songs sit with that. So yeah, we all have a kind of different. We can talk about that as well, about specific songs, about their incarnations over the years.
Yes,
and how those. It's almost like music hall and those kind of variety songs have become fresh again and revisited. So yeah, that's just been lovely to share that kind of thing with an audience, which I can't do in a pub sing along when everyone's drinking and it's just all about, like Mr. Fogg's Tavern, it's all about just being in the moment and
Well, it looks like fun. It looks like a great time. I've never we were supposed to come to England, and we love England. We call it the mother country. We were supposed to come in May, and we were going to spend 3 weeks. We had all this stuff planned, and of course that didn't happen. And so, like you, I was forced to pivot what I'm doing. I'm not doing tours, so I've always wanted to do a podcast and talk about history. And I like this idea of, I don't want it to be like a stuffy podcast about history. I want it to be like, let's have a conversation about history. Yeah. And so here I am, I'm doing it. So that's I don't brilliant. Know, maybe we're both responsible for COVID. I don't know.
Do you have English relatives or English roots?
Well, the story is this. My dad was his grandfather was from Ireland, and he was a very proud Irishman. He thought that he was full on Irish, which nobody is full on Irish. But and he started doing his family history research, and this was in the early 90s, and I was like, I was tagging along with him. It's when I really started getting interested in that. And he said, if I find out I have any British roots or English roots, I don't know what I'll do. And so sadly he passed away in the 90s. And then I started, when, ancestry and all that, I started researching. And what I found out is that his grandfather was pure English, Church of England, no less, Church of England.
Awkward. Thank God he never knew. Thank God he didn't know.
Well, he's rolling in his grave, I always say. But I really embraced the English roots, and I just started doing a lot of research. I've written a book of historical fiction that I make my main character come from where I trace my family history from.
Oh, that's brilliant. Oh, that's nice.
It's not published yet. My siblings, I have 5 siblings, and they're all like, what are you talking about? We're English. And none of them really they didn't latch onto it the way that I did. And I think they were a little offended, but I know this is all true because we did our DNA, we did the record, the family history, we used the record. It all lines up. And so
whereabouts in the UK?
Hampshire. So generally in the general area of Hampshire, my 1500s, I think we go back to a little town called Means. English roots are easy because the records are so intact.
Of course.
Not so with the Irish, but so yeah, we go back to Maidstone, and we kind of keep moving. What is that? North, south, east, every so often, and we ended up in Petersfield, which was on the.
Okay. Yeah. No, well.
I don't know. Is that Hampshire, or is that the next county over?
I think it still is Hampshire. Yeah, it's on the way. I've driven through many times on the way down to kind of Southampton and Portsmouth.
Yeah, I've been there. So I've been there. I've done a research, and I've been there, and it's my favorite place in the world is England. I love England. So
that's fantastic.
Anyways, we've gone way off the track, and we haven't even started the reason we're here. But I would, and you can do this now or later if you want. I'd like you to tell the audience pretty much what you do, who you are, and what you do, as only you can explain it.
Okay, well, I'm Tom Carradine. I'm a pianist and a singer and a musical director. I've spent many years as a conductor and a keyboard player on theatre shows, but my real passion is for Victorian Music Hall and the pub piano sing-along. So normally, COVID aside, I'm found performing across London and the UK and even Europe, pushing my real piano around and leading pubs and just groups of people in good old-fashioned sing-alongs. So in the UK, that kind of pub piano tradition kind of originates, I suppose, in the Victorian Music Hall in the Victorian times. But then that kind of has lived through the wars, both world wars, perhaps, and also through kind of through into modern day. There are still a few sing-along pianists out there who are leading kind of groups in a good old-fashioned. In London we would call it a knees up.
A knees up.
A good old-fashioned sing-along party. So yeah, thankfully I've been back in the day. I did a biochemistry degree of all things. I'm a trained scientist. Where are we now? That's kind of 16 years ago. Ever since graduating, I've been a full-time musician. So very proud to make a living from music, and now being able to do that, but sharing my love of many genres of music, but specifically Victorian Music Hall and perhaps the music of the 20s and 30s with people, and spreading a bit of sing-along joy.
Well, I certainly do appreciate it. My mom was actually from France. She grew up in Belgium, and then when the war happened, they were refugees in France. Long story. It's a documentary. I'm working on a documentary about it. I'll keep you updated.
Stories. We had many Belgian refugees come to Tunbridge Wells, because I don't live in London actually. I live about 45 minutes out of London to the southeast, in a little town called Tunbridge. But the next kind of town along is a old Georgian spa town called Royal Tunbridge Wells. Actually, they took a lot of Belgian refugees during the First World War, so there's a connection there.
When I was growing up, they had the record albums, and I remember Sing Along with Mitch. We used to listen to Sing Along with Mitch, and he used to do a lot of those old songs, and that's where I was first familiar with, A Bicycle Built for Two.
Indeed.
That type of
it's funny
thing.
That so many of those songs that we think are British sing-along classics are actually American songs, are American imports.
Which I love that you give the history. I'm really enjoying the history, because
thank you. Well,
when you're doing your show and you're telling us a little history, I like that. I really love it.
I'm glad, because there are stories to tell about it, and also because, especially working class, Victorian Music Hall was very much a working class entertainment, rooted and kind of the origin really in London, I suppose, and particularly in the East End, the kind of working class part of London. But it spread further afield, and there are many great examples of music hall venues across the country. The Britannia Panopticon in Glasgow, the Malt Cross in Nottingham. I mean, every town had at least one, if not 2, 3, 4, 5 music halls, because it was such a popular form of entertainment. But those songs have lived on and have been revived over the years. I mean, for me, it's listening to, we had a singer in the 60s and 70s called Max Bygraves. He did a lot of kind of sing-along material, but the songs have been revived, and especially sing-along pianists, and wonderful sing-along pianists like Winifred Atwell and Mrs. Mills. She was a middle-aged lady who played pub piano, and she was a real sensation over here in the kind of 70s, playing kind of non-stop kind of party albums, very honky-tonk, ragtime, stride piano. Again, those musical influences are very much American influences coming across, that we see with the swathes of music that came across the Atlantic, particularly towards the very latter years of the 1800s, and most prevalent, I suppose, in the kind of early ragtime in the teens and 20s as well. That kind of ragtime stride piano sound, which has become synonymous with a London pub pianist and that pub piano sound.
So we kind of jumped ahead, and I didn't ask the question, so I'm going to ask the question. What is our favorite history that we're going to be talking about today?
Well, if it's not clear so far, my favourite period of history is English Victorian history. Perhaps late Victorian and early Edwardian, so very much the turn of the century. The turn of the century, it was a huge, and I suppose the run up to the First World War. That's my musically what fascinates me so much. A time where the social history and the kind of English culture around that really kind of resonates, and I find fascinating. I find it absolutely fascinating.
That was, that's interesting. I never thought about that period leading up to World War I, but it was kind of, it seems like it was a really happy period maybe, and then World War I really changed everything.
No, I think that's true. And also it's very much on the cusp of, it's the kind of final period in British history where really the kind of class system is as structured as it was. The revelation the country went through in the tragedy of the First World War, and then the kind of rebuilding of England after that, and that huge loss of life. And of course, then you get in the same way that after the First World War in the States, you get the leading through into the release of the 20s. But then, of course, the Great Depression that comes with it, and similar kind of effects over here. And then, of course, the rise of all the political situation leading into the Second World War. Certainly the Edwardian era. It's funny. I think when you look at pictures of perhaps late Victorian and Edwardian entertainment in particular, because especially photographs are very formal and everyone is encouraged to have a straight face and look miserable, we kind of assume, and also because everything's black and white, of course, when we look at pictures, everything's in black and white. But what we forget is actually people wore colour, people enjoyed themselves, people had fun. With the Industrial Revolution in the UK, I suppose, as well, especially for working class people. They worked hard, but they also played hard. And things around kind of working time and having days off. In the Victorian times, when bank holidays and kind of public holidays became a thing, and the whole factories of people in the cotton mills in Yorkshire, for example, would all decamp to the seaside for the day. Those kind of day trips. There's a great book by Lee Thompson called Palaces of Pleasure, which is all about entertainment in the Victorian times. And it just kind of goes to show that along with that, we're going to see sports. They were great sports fans, football and cricket. And we kind of, from the pictures, we think they were very staid, but actually they knew how to have a good time. And certainly when you consider going to the music hall, which for many a working class person, it would cost money to go. It wasn't a dirt cheap thing to do. So you have to pay, but the kind of to go to the music hall, to go to a theatrical performance and almost kind of lose yourself in that for that brief moment, for that brief time, have a laugh, enjoy the song, sing along, see some kind of glitz and glamour on stage. They're not as kind of stiff and uptight as we kind of assume they are.
So when did the Victorian music hall, like what time period did that come about? And another question on the tail of that is there a connection between the music hall and vaudeville? Is it?
Of course, absolutely, okay. Yeah. Vaudeville is the American equivalent, okay. And I think they both started. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not so certain about the origins in the US, but I think the origins are in the same way. Victorian music hall really kind of started. Well, it kind of developed as a form in itself in around the 1850s. It was entrepreneurs, mostly like tavern and pub owners, who decided that in order to sell more beer and encourage people to stay longer in their pubs, that they should put on some entertainment. And it started off very kind of homespun, with maybe perhaps a little raised stage in the corner of the pub. And originally, actually, with amateur singers, there was an English tradition of glee clubs, kind of amateur singing together, choral singing. You would do that in a glee club. You'd sing they call them catches as well. Those kind of the songs of the day, folk songs and things that you would sing while drinking as a group. But again, probably amateur singers doing that while they were enjoying it. But that developed into tavern owners thinking they could make a bit more money. So a lot of the Victorian pleasure gardens, which were normally had a tavern attached and had large grounds with beautiful ornamental fountains and pagodas and things like that, where you could go and stroll and promenade and have a drink and enjoy yourself and see other entertainments as well there. They became a bit more savvy with that and started building purpose-built halls. I think it's Charles Morton was the kind of real kind of forefather of that, and opened the Canterbury Music Hall near Waterloo in London, kind of rivaling the kind of straight legitimate theatre that was over the other side of the river in the West End in the kind of early days of the kind of the West End theatres. So Charles Morton built a music hall, the Canterbury, and then you get places like the Eagle Tavern in Old Street, which actually is where the nursery rhyme of Pop Goes the Weasel comes from. Half a pound, it's up and he rides up and down the city road, in and out of the Eagle, in and out of the tavern, spending your money. And Pop Goes the Weasel, it was to do with popping or pawning your, I think it was the Hatters, popping their weasel, I think some form of implement they use, a tool, in order to raise money to buy beer, to drink. But yeah, people like that, tavern owners. And also, of course, in the East End, in Limehouse and Wapping, John Wilton, who owned a pub called and I can't remember what it is. He owned a pub and he gradually bought the houses on either side of it to make it bigger. Eventually, he decided he was going to build a music hall in the garden. And so he did. And that music hall then became Wilton's Music Hall, which is now the oldest grand surviving music hall in the world.
Oh, good. I was going to ask you if there were any surviving music halls. Great.
Yeah, in London there are two great examples. There's Wilton's, which is in Limehouse, and there's Hoxton Hall, which is in Hoxton near Old Street. Both East End, so both kind of working class neighbourhoods. Wilton, and they both have a kind of horseshoe-shaped balcony. Though actually Hoxton Hall has, I think it's 2 balconies. Wilton's only has 1. But they're great examples of that kind of entertainment. A flat floor. It wasn't like theatre seating. You wouldn't be sitting in rows as in theatre that we kind of know, the kind of formal Victorian theatre, I suppose. Or one of our famous theatre architects, Frank Matcham, was very famous in building these Victorian theatres with the kind of, when you think of a West End theatre or an old-fashioned Victorian theatre, that's what you think of. Music halls was very often flat floor because it was about the tavern entertainment. So it was about sitting at a table with friends, drinking and eating while you're enjoying the show. So yeah, Wilton's still exists, Hoxton still exists. And as I mentioned, the Britannia Panopticon in Glasgow as well. That's another beautiful example. That's in a much more dilapidated state. Hoxton Hall is a kind of great state. It's been renovated and refurbished. And Wilton's, actually, the thing I love about Wilton's is they had a renovation and a refurbishment a few years ago, but they decided to keep it in a kind of state, so it looks like a state of disrepair, because there are so many layers to the wallpaper, to the paint on the wall.
I love that. I love it.
And because actually the way that the John Wilson knocked I think it's 5 houses together at the front, there are no huge rooms front of house. There's a bar and there's a upstairs cocktail bar, but there's lots of little individual rooms and the doorways kind of, there's steps and up to doorways and little triangular crevices where there's a skylight and there's nothing else, because that's the way that the building was kind of knocked through. It looks unfinished. The one great example of a refurbished musical, which I haven't mentioned, and might be known to your listeners, actually, certainly anyone in the States, certainly in the UK, is the Leeds City Varieties. Leeds, which is a huge town, a very industrial town in the north of England. They have a beautiful Victorian Edwardian music hall that they've renovated, and it appeared on a very popular TV series in the 50s, 60s, 70s in this country called The Good Old Days. It was a typical music hall entertainment, kind of led by a chairman. So the performance would be kind of hosted by an MC, a master of ceremonies, who would sit at the front, in front of the stage, with a little table with some candles on and a gavel, and he would kind of warm up the audience, and introduce all of the acts. So Leeds City Varieties is a great example of where a theatre has been renovated and refurbished to its former glory, as opposed to Wilton's, which is, there's something magical though about Wilton's.
Yeah, I was telling you that I live in Georgetown, which is a National Historic Landmark District. It was founded in 1859. It was they called it the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, which was not really a gold rush. Our town is over 240 buildings are protected, and they go back to the 1800s. But I have a friend who bought a building, and they're putting a bar and a restaurant in there, and he let me go in and look. And I love, you could see all these different layers of history, because the building's been there since the 1800s. It was originally a theater. We had like 4 theaters in this small town back in the 1800s.
Wow.
So there was a lot of entertainment going on here.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I was saying about the similarities between music hall and vaudeville. For you in the States, it also developed out of kind of saloon bar entertainment. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm hoping he preserves it. I'm like, oh my God, because you can see the different layers of, like you said, the wallpaper, the floors. There was a bowling alley in the basement, just all. And you know, to bring it back to one era would be lovely, but I love that idea of having all those different layers of history, because it gives
it's a tricky thing to do in order to preserve it. I mean, Wilton's needed stabilizing. It was going to fall down if they hadn't spent all the money on renovating it. It's been used in so many filming for films and music videos and things over the years. Interesting, Wilton's has beautiful barley twist columns. They're the only example of them in the world. If you see these barley twist columns, then you know it's Wilton's. But there was a recent TV series that was made set in France called Penny Dreadful.
I binge watched that.
There we go, about the Grand Guignol in Paris. There was something they liked the look of Wilton's, but they wanted to do other stuff with it, so they replicated on a soundstage basically Wilton's. So if you see those barley twist columns in Penny Dreadful, it's not Wilton's.
Okay.
but they did an amazing job at kind of, because Wilton's is such a great example of, as I said, a flat floor music hall that kind of developed out of the tavern. Yes, certainly when you get later in British theatre kind of history, the peak of kind of theatre building, as I said, for kind of formal theatre, for kind of perhaps a slightly more kind of high class entertainment than music hall, you get the wonderful architects like Frank Matcham building these kind of chocolate box theatres, these classic kind of English playhouses with wonderful sweeping cantilevered balconies and beautiful sight lines, and the acoustics are amazing. Places like the London Palladium, the London Coliseum, Hackney Empire. Now, interestingly, actually, Hackney Empire was a variety theatre. It was a music hall, but it was designed by Frank Matcham, and there is not a bad seat in the house. You can hear and you can see from every seat. It's joyous to play as well, because those theatres, you really feel, if you're standing on stage or you're in the orchestra pit, you feel as if everybody is so close around you.
So have you played at all these places then?
I played at many of them, yes. Wilton's I've played many times, and Hoxton Hall too. Yet to perform at the Britannia in Glasgow, though I would love to. My family on my mother's side come from Glasgow, so I really feel a real affinity with the city. I love Scotland. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. And actually, I have family connections with the music hall, in that my great grandmother was a dancer on the halls in Glasgow. The only downside with that is the fact that when I was there in Glasgow on tour with another show, with a musical theatre show years ago, I went to the local history part of the library and wanted some information. I had a name and kind of dates and things, and they basically just turned around and said, "You've come to the wrong city," because outside of London, Glasgow had the biggest concentration of music halls in any other city. So there were hundreds of them, but that could be from huge theatres down to kind of tiny stages in pubs and bars. So unfortunately, that was the end of trying to find any more information, really, because kind of performing in the music hall was seen as being akin to prostitution. Really, it wasn't looked upon as a proper or a kind of a proper career for a lady, especially. Yeah, she never did it again. So unfortunately, I have no more information than that on.
Oh, so you don't know the name of the hall or anything like that, or what her stage name was?
If you're only a dancer, then certainly in music hall, you would only see on a poster, for example, you would only see the build. We'd call them build artists. So because all the variety artists and music hall, you call them a bill, because that's the poster, the bill poster. That's where we get the term top of the bill from. Where if the top star would be, their name would be in big letters at the top of the poster, going down to lower down to the smaller acts that the regulars might recognise. And there was a very big music hall circuit around the UK, so acts would tour. They would play 1 week here, 1 week there, and return to venues again every year or every 6 months or every year. So you kind of got and gradually a lot of those acts worked their way up the bill as they became more famous. And equally, then it always makes me laugh that the bottom you would you jokingly call them the wines and spirits. So the smaller acts that weren't very famous, called the wines and spirits, because their name would be among the line about the proprietor being licensed to provide wines and spirits. So
sure,
you know, those acts that were tiny at the bottom of the poster, but many of those acts worked their way up. And became huge acts in their own right. Music hall didn't die out at a specific date in the same way. It must have been, I suppose, the same way in the States, really, where certainly the First World War was a huge kind of watershed in entertainment. The outbreak of the First World War was perhaps the height of Victorian music hall in the UK. And actually, it was used as very much as a recruitment drive for recruiting young men to go to the fight at the front. A very famous performer, Vesta Tilley. She was a female performer, but she performed in male drag. So you might call her a drag king. She either as a kind of an upper class toff in top hat and tails, or in military uniform. And apparently she was known as the Britain's best recruiting sergeant, because her standing on stage singing these patriotic songs to an audience of couples, lots of couples going, a man taking his girlfriend or wife to the theatre, he would obviously then feel a patriotic swell. And often they would have recruiting sergeants on stage where she would invite men to come up and sign up to go and fight in the First World War.
That is fascinating.
It's shocking when you think about it. But that aside, as I said, you then have the First World War, and after that, that's the real kind of height of music hall. Then you kind of lose the chairman character in performance, and we move, especially because of course the influx of the moving pictures and recorded entertainment as well. That means that the music hall changes into what we would call variety, which was very popular in the UK until perhaps the 1970s, a real kind of variety circuit. Again, very similar to music hall, where acts would tour for a venue each week and you would have a bill of performers. But the format was very different. And as I said, you lost the kind of chairman kind of character. But many of the latter music hall stars, people like Harry Champion and Hetty King, kept performing as long as they could, really, and ended up performing. Yeah, I mean, Hetty King was, when did she last perform? I've got a feeling the kind of 70s, early 70s, in her old age, because she'd kind of come in at the kind of turn of the century. Kind of teens and 20s. So it's fascinating that it does mean that there are a few acts, people like Gus Elan, who was a Costa comic, a working class kind of costermonger, street seller character. There's some great Pathé news clip videos of him singing, and people like Mari Lloyd, perhaps the most famous female musical star. And Mari Lloyd, there are video clips of her as well performing. So thankfully, the tail end of music hall, there are videos that exist of those performers. Unfortunately, the earlier performers and the kind of real kind of people at the forefront of creating that entertainment in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, we only have photographs and sheet music. That's what exists. And everything else has to be a kind of a reconstruction or a imagination of the kind of style of performance. I mean, there are lots of written accounts of it, which is great, but unfortunately, yeah, how I'd kill to go back in time to see some of those early performers. It would just be, because it was a very different style of performance, a very kind of pantomime, very kind of stylistic performance. Yeah, I'd love to go back. I wouldn't want to live in the time. But I would really like to be able to experience that firsthand, I suppose.
I would love to go back in time. We're going to stop here for today, but there's so much more to come in part 2 of my interview with Tom Carradine, who, in spite of what Google might tell you, is not the son of Kung Fu actor David Carradine. Be sure to check out the episode notes to find out more about Tom Carradine, his self-isolation sing-along, Victorian music hall history, and the performers of the music halls. In the meantime, thanks for joining us today and have a great week. I'll let Tom take you out today. Enjoy!
Everybody knows the next one. Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer do. I'm half crazy, all for the love of you. It won't be a stylish marriage, I can't afford a carriage, but you'll look sweet upon the seat of a bicycle made for two. Let's all go down the Strand. Have a banana. Oh, come on. You can do better than that. We go. The classic Cockney interjection is have a banana after 3. Oh, 1, 2, 3. Have a banana. That's more like it. Here we go. 2, 3, 4. Let's all go down the Strand. Have a banana. Let's all go down the Strand. I'll be leader, you can march behind. Come with me and see what we can find. Let's all go down the Strand. Have a banana. Oh, what a happy band. That's the place of fun and noise, all amongst the girls and boys. And let's all go down the Strand. Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I love London so. Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I think of her wherever I go.